Right, so get ready. We're diving deep into Trump's second inaugural address. We've got a whole stack of articles really breaking it down, fact-checking controversies, even some international perspectives.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how different people viewed this speech. We've got articles in English and Spanish like El segundo mandato de Trump, Las mentiras y medias verdades de Trump, and Verdades y mentiras en el discurso de Trump.
Wow, okay. I'm really curious to see what stands out to you. Like, where should we even begin with this?
Well, right off the bat, right out of the gate, Trump makes this claim about the Panama Canal, a pretty striking one, I'd say. He says 38,000 Americans died building it, and that now China's running the show.
Hold on, 38,000 Americans.
Mhm.
I mean, I vaguely remember learning about the canal way back in school, but that number just doesn't sound right at all. What do our sources say about this?
Yeah, it's a powerful image, like
Yeah.
very powerful. But the reality is, well, it's a lot less dramatic. The actual death toll during the construction, it was closer to 5,600.
Yeah.
And most of those who died were Caribbean workers, a fact that, honestly, a lot of historical accounts just kind of overlook.
So not only is the number completely inflated, but it seems like he's, I don't know, maybe trying to rewrite history to fit a certain narrative.
Exactly, exactly. And then there's that whole thing about China running the canal, completely unfounded. The Panama Canal administrator actually came out and directly denied that claim.
It almost feels like he's, I don't know, trying to tap into some kind of sense of American loss or resentment, even if it means, kind of twisting the truth a bit.
That's a really good point, actually. That theme of rewriting history, to create this sense of grievance, it pops up again. When we look at Trump's claims about inflation, he says the U.S. is facing record inflation due to, quote unquote, massive overspending and skyrocketing energy prices.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I've definitely noticed that prices are going up everywhere, really. But record inflation, come on, help me out here. Is that even remotely accurate?
Well, it's true that energy prices and government spending, those are definitely factors that can contribute to inflation, for sure. But the current rate, it's 2.9%, nowhere near a record. Like back in 1920, inflation hit a whopping 23.7% in the U.S.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. That definitely puts things into perspective a bit. So we're seeing a pattern here, right? This cherry picking of facts to kind of fit a narrative.
You got it. It's a reminder, we can't just take things at face value, especially when it comes to political rhetoric. Got to dig deeper, look at the context, consider the motivations behind the claims that are being made.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of context, there is one thing Trump did get right, at least. He mentioned that the U.S. spends more on healthcare per person than any other country.
That is a fact. Verifiable. It comes up all the time, actually, in discussions about healthcare reform. It's a huge concern, obviously.
Yeah. But then he goes on to say the system fails in times of catastrophe. So which is it? Are we spending too much or not enough? Or is there like a deeper issue here?
It raises some serious questions about, effectiveness of all that spending. Are we actually getting our money's worth when it comes to healthcare outcomes, access to care, or is there this disconnect between how much we're spending and the actual quality of care that people are getting?
It's like he's acknowledging a real problem, but I don't know, not really offering a clear solution or even acknowledging how complex the issue is.
Exactly. That's something we see quite a bit in political rhetoric, actually, using a little kernel of truth to sow doubt, fear, without actually trying to address the real root causes. And this kind of leads us to another interesting area, actually, Trump's take on climate-related emergencies.
Oh, yeah. I remember him mentioning things like the California wildfires and the North Carolina floods in his speech.
Right. He paints this picture, of the U.S. government failing to provide basic services during these crises. But when we look closer at his actual claims, it turns out he's spreading misinformation.
Misinformation about real disasters. Like, that actually happened. That's pretty disturbing.
It is. Like, for example, he was promoting conspiracy theories, right? About aid being withheld in North Carolina after the floods, which actually led to threats against federal emergency workers.
Wow. So he's taking these tragedies, these real events that real people experienced, and he's twisting them to fit his own narrative.
It sure seems that way. And in California, he totally ignored expert advice on how to manage the wildfires. Instead, he pushed his own agenda, which, again, has no basis in reality.
I'm sensing a pattern here. Take a real event, twist it to fit a narrative. Use that to sow fear and distrust in the government. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And this pattern, well, it becomes even more obvious, even more evident when we look at his statements on immigration. And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, you're right. That's a great place to pick up after a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into Trump's claims about immigration and how his rhetoric connects to the bigger picture. Stay with us.
Yeah, it's like this manipulation of facts, this recurring theme almost. And we see it again with Trump's take on immigration.
Yeah, for sure. His statements on that were like some of the most controversial parts of the whole speech.
Hmm.
He really paints this picture of the U.S. harboring, quote unquote, dangerous criminals, specifically immigrants.
Right. And that's, I think, where the danger of this kind of rhetoric really becomes clear. It's not just about twisting the facts a little, it's about like creating this whole climate of fear, suspicion. That can have real world consequences for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Our sources point out that there's actually no evidence to back up that claim, right?
Yeah.
That immigrants are more likely to be criminals. In fact, like studies show the exact opposite. Immigrants are actually statistically less likely to commit crimes than native-born Americans.
Exactly. And by pushing that false narrative, it's like he's basically demonizing a whole group of people, right? Making it
Yeah.
easier to justify policies that are, discriminatory, inhumane. We
Sure.
even saw this play out, remember, with his announcement of a new emergency declaration at the southern border.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's framing immigration as this crisis, this invasion almost,
Yeah.
that requires these drastic measures. But our sources suggest a totally different reality. Most immigrants are just, trying to find a better life for themselves, for their families, fleeing violence, poverty, persecution in their home countries.
Exactly. And the rhetoric, it creates this us versus them dynamic, that makes it so much harder to have like a real conversation, a nuanced conversation about immigration policy.
So what does this actually mean then? For policy, I mean. What kind of actions can we actually expect based on this kind of rhetoric?
Well, the emergency declaration, that's a big one. It gives Trump a lot of power to like redirect funds, bypass Congress.
Hmm.
It could lead to, more aggressive enforcement measures.
Okay, so like what? What are some specific examples of those kinds of policies? What could be put in place?
Well, we could see an increase in deportations for sure,
Yeah.
even of people who, don't pose any threat to public safety. There could be more restrictions on asylum seekers. Make it harder for people who are fleeing persecution to actually find refuge in the U.S.
It's kind of alarming to think about, the potential human cost of these policies, all driven by this narrative that isn't even based in reality.
It is. It really is. And it's a good reminder. Words have power. The way we talk about these issues, it shapes how people see things, public perception,
Yeah.
and that influences the policies that get put into place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about, calling out lies for the sake of accuracy. It's about understanding how those lies are being used
Right.
to manipulate people, to justify harmful action.
Right. And it's important to remember this isn't just about immigration. This kind of rhetoric, we see it all the time. Climate change, healthcare, economic policy.
Well, yeah, speaking of economic policy, Trump spent a good amount of time in his speech, painting this picture of a booming economy in America, taking credit for like record low unemployment and a surge in manufacturing jobs.
Right.
But is that the whole picture?
That's where things get a little nuanced. It's true. Some economic indicators, they have improved under Trump's presidency, but others haven't. They've stagnated or even gotten worse. Our sources actually point out that income inequality, that's continued to rise. The gap between the rich and the poor, it's widening.
So not quite the economic miracle that he's making it out to be.
Exactly. And even the the positive indicators, they need to be looked at a little closer. Unemployment is low, yeah. But a lot of people are working multiple jobs, or they're just, struggling to make ends meet with the rising cost of living.
Right. It's a lot more complicated than he makes it seem.
It is. It really is. And it's important to think about, the long-term sustainability of the economic growth we're seeing. Is it benefiting all Americans or just a select few? Those are the questions we need to be asking.
Okay, so we've got Trump, distorting facts about immigration, the economy. But at the same time, he acknowledges that truth about healthcare spending while, undermining confidence in the system at the same time. It almost feels like a strategy, to create confusion, sow distrust.
Yeah, it's a tactic for sure. We see in populist movements a lot, actually, creating this sense that the system is rigged and only, a strong leader can fix it.
So what's the antidote, I
Yeah.
guess? How do we combat this misinformation, prevent it from shaping, our political discourse?
Well, it starts with critical thinking, right?
Mm.
Media literacy. We have to be skeptical of information, especially when it's coming from sources with a clear agenda.
Yeah, for sure. That means, checking sources, looking for evidence, being aware of our own biases.
Right, and it means supporting quality journalism,
Mm.
fact-checking organizations, the ones that are, dedicated to holding powerful people accountable.
And being willing to, engage in conversations, respectful dialogue with people who have different views, even when it's hard. We can't just retreat into our echo chambers.
Exactly. If we let ourselves get divided by fear and misinformation, we all lose, and the stakes are too high for that.
It sounds like what you're saying is we need to be more than just, passive consumers of information. We have to be active, participate in shaping the narrative.
Yeah.
And that starts with being, informed and engaged.
Exactly. And that engagement, it has to go beyond just calling out lies. We need to be having deeper conversations
Mm.
about the challenges we're facing and demanding solutions that actually address the root causes of those problems.
Well, we've covered a lot today. Panama Canal, immigration, the economy. And we've seen this consistent pattern, haven't we? Distortion, manipulation, and Trump's rhetoric.
Yeah, we have. But amidst all the falsehoods, the fear-mongering, there are glimmers of truth in there. He's tapping into real anxieties, frustrations that people are feeling. And we can't ignore that.
That's a good point. We can't just dismiss those concerns as unfounded or irrational. We have to understand where they're coming from,
Yeah.
engage in a good faith effort to address them. And that's where the real work begins.
I agree. That work, it requires a commitment to the truth, a willingness to listen to different perspectives, and a shared belief in the power of, democracy to solve our problems, even the complex ones.
Well said. This has been a really thought-provoking deep dive, I think. Trump's second inaugural address, it was more than just a speech. It was a carefully crafted narrative to advance a specific agenda.
It was. And by understanding that agenda, we can be better prepared, I think, to, navigate the challenges ahead, work towards a future that's more just, more equitable.
It's a good reminder. Words have power. And we all have a responsibility to, use our voices, to speak truth to power, hold our leaders accountable. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and empowering.
Hello. If you are listening to this, you may not be subscribed to the channel. Activate the bell so that you will be notified when there is a new story, and share it with the people you want. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Okay, so we've kind of unpacked Trump's his approach, twisting facts, building that us versus them. But let's talk about healthcare and climate change specifically. Those are, huge issues, right? They affect all of us.
They do, and they're complex, We need nuanced solutions. But the way Trump frames them
Yeah.
in his speech, a little concerning, I'd say.
Okay, so on healthcare, he says the U.S. spends the most per person. Which is true, right? But then he goes on to say that the system, quote unquote, fails in times of catastrophe. That feels contradictory almost.
It does, right. And I think that's deliberate. He's playing on people's anxieties
Yeah.
about, how expensive healthcare is, how hard it is to access. But he's not offering solutions or even really acknowledging how complex the issue is. He just uses it to make people distrust the system.
Yeah, it's like he's saying it's broken, but then what?
Yeah.
No real ideas for how to fix it.
Exactly. And that lack of, a clear plan is especially worrisome when it comes to climate change.
Right. In the speech, he mentions the wildfires in California, floods in North Carolina. But he doesn't even, connect them to climate change.
Yeah.
At all.
Nope. He treats them like these isolated incidents, doesn't acknowledge the role that, climate change plays in all of this, the way it makes these disasters worse. And that's dangerous, right? Because it keeps us from actually doing anything about it, addressing the real causes.
So he's using these events, these real tragedies, to push his agenda instead of having a real conversation about, protecting the planet, future generations.
Seems that way. And this whole dismissal of climate change, it's not a big deal. It goes against, all the science. We've seen this throughout his presidency. And it has real consequences, for the environment, for global cooperation on climate action.
So, okay, what does this all mean then for American politics? We've got a leader who is, actively distorting facts, sowing division, undermining trust in institutions. What now?
It's a tough time for sure, but I think it's also a chance to recommit ourselves, to truth, to transparency, accountability.
I like that. It's not just about, like, pointing out the lies. It's about expecting more
Yeah.
from our leaders, from ourselves even.
Exactly. We need to be more critical of the information we're taking in, more involved in our communities, and more willing to hold our, elected officials accountable for what they say, for what they do.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that democracy, it's not a spectator sport, right? It takes all of us participating.
Couldn't agree more. We need to be informed, engaged,
Uh,
committed to, truth, justice, equality, all that.
Well said. This has been I don't know, really thought-provoking deep dive. Trump's second inaugural address. It wasn't just a speech, was it? It was more like a carefully constructed story designed to, push a very specific agenda.
It was. And by understanding that agenda, we can be better equipped, right? To deal with the challenges ahead, work towards a better future, more just, more equitable for everyone.
That's a good reminder. Words have power, and we have to use ours, to speak truth to power, hold our leaders accountable. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everybody. Hope you found it informative and, well, empowering.